and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons & Dragons and discuss how we might include them in our role-playing campaigns. My name's Fiona. All of the days have now merged into one. I don't know where I am or what I'm doing, but with me, as always, the person that will steer the ship back on course, talking about roads and cars and all that stuff, is my co-host, Ryan. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
I'm great, but that's a huge amount of responsibility. You fail to understand that I may be just as addled and absolutely confused in my space and time location as you. Like I am. Yeah, days are weird, aren't they, in lockdown? Everything's still strange and... I think it's for lack of holidays, isn't it? Lack of being able to sort of get away for long extended periods of time or leave the country or go away for, have things in my diary. Just stuff in my diary. That's the weird thing, because you can have like calls and online things and all kinds of Zoom meetings and team meetings, whatever it is. But I don't think it's not the same as having to actually then go and meet somebody by getting on the tube and then commuting to them and then looking forward to getting back home. And do you know what I mean? Like there's a process to actually going out that I think just breaks the day up.
Yeah, it's bizarre thinking how much I hated the commute, and I still hate it. But now the commute, there's only like a queue for my kettle rather than the queue for the tube and queue for the bathroom, all that sort of thing. But yeah, I feel like now that I've got used to like working from home, it would be nice if I actually forced myself to go out a little bit more often than I do. Like I think taking out the bins is not necessarily the designated one time a day to go out or exercise. I need to probably do my lunchtime walks again. That's what I need to do. I don't know.
I think D&D campaigns have been made on less exciting adventure hooks. Like go down to the bins.
I guess with that very odd segue on recycling.
Recycling? What are you talking about? Recycling my content? What are you trying to say? I am fresh and original. I come up with new stuff every week.
Every week. What is this week's topic then, Ryan? What are we looking at today?
All right, so we're diving back into world creation here and thinking a little bit as a dungeon master how you might want to spice up the campaign you're running or the module you're running, even if it's pre-bought or somebody's given it to you or you've stolen it off the back of the van, wherever you may have gotten your idea from. What we're looking at is Monstrous Adventurers and how they kind of thread into D&D and how your players could enjoy them. And specifically as well, we're sort of veering off a little bit when we say how NPCs can play them as well, because PCs and NPCs have similarities in terms of how you build a character, but then obviously there are differences with the fact that you've got actual people in front of you playing Monstrous Adventurers, and there are challenges that brings as much as bringing some great ideas of maybe the wackier ones in his NPCs. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how to make a monstrous adventurer and then sort of some ideas about the types of monstrous adventurers you might get.
Exciting. You hear about it more and more in certain D&D streams. Like, I don't know about you, Ryan, but sometimes the ones I watch is always very typical, like you've got your humans, elves, dwarves, etc. And then some of the alternate version would then be a tiefling or a tabaxi to add into the mix, but hardly ever these races that we're going to talk about today. So I'm actually really excited to see what we can talk about. Can you give us like a brief overview about what kind of monstrous adventures are we talking about?
So we are looking at Volo's Guide to Monsters specifically in terms of the information. And it's presented pretty well. What page is it? Page 118. I'm just like, I've got my microphone in front of me and the page number is right under it. And I'm looking at it going, what is that? I can't see. I haven't got my glasses on. You don't need to know this. I'm rambling. Monstrous Adventurers, page 118. And the good thing about Volo, and we've spoken about some of these chapters before where they go into the backgrounds about mind flayers or about giants or about whatever you may be talking about. And a lot of them have races that are roughly humanoid in size, medium, with a life expectancy of sort of 100 years. And you kind of think about it and go, oh, well, actually, I could probably play a character like this if only I had the rules for it. And a few of them really do fall quite neatly into it. So, I mean, the ones given to us in the book at the moment are Bugbears, Goblins, Hobgoblins, Kobolds, which are ridiculous, Orcs, and Yuan-Ti purebloods. Yuan-Ti I just always find really confusing because there's about 500 million versions of these snake people. But yeah, purebloods specifically. And it sort of gives us stat blocks for each one and how to create a character with them. But what we'll talk about a little bit first before we get into the really boring mechanics of it is kind of like the idea behind why you might want one in your campaign or things to think about when putting one in.
Well, let's start with that then. Why would you, as a DM or a player, may consider try a monstrous race as an adventurer compared to some of the other sort of player's handbook creations, would you say?
There's loads of different reasons why somebody might want to play as one. You've brilliantly identified one of the main reasons, which is the player edgelord. And everybody knows one. It doesn't matter who you have in your group or how many times you play or how many friends you know. There's always one person that you invite along and they have that wicked smile on their face as they listen to everyone else go, as you say, I want to be the human, I want to be the tabaxi, I want to be the dwarf, whatever it is. And then they go, I want to be the goblin. And you go, okay, here we go. It's always one. And that is one reason why somebody might want to play a monstrous adventure. And it's good to sort of have that in mind because this is, it can be done in a way that actually works. But people might be looking for a challenge. A lot of the monstrous adventurers have quite significant RP role-playing aspects to them and how they fit into the world and campaigns. You may get people who just need a new challenge. If you genuinely have played about 20, 25 campaigns over the course of 20 years of D&D, you may be bored of playing dwarves and humans. And you may just look at one of the stat blocks and go, hey, that's a really fun. Because there are some really weird abilities that aren't typical of anything you see in the player's handbook. So you may look at that just from a mechanic point of view and go, you know what? I've got a really fun build that relies on something the Bugbear has or something the Goblin has and run with that.
And I think as well, it sort of mentions it right at the beginning of the chapter, in typical D&D, and I say typical with like quotation marks, because I think nowadays there's no such thing as typical D&D. You are friends who are adventurers that go and do things that may be heroic or less heroic, depending on how inept your party is, I guess. But it talks about, so most of these races are goblinoid in some way. So like you said, hobgoblins, bugbears, etc. So typically seen as villains, certainly early on in the lower levels. Certainly in Lost Mines of Phandelver, your first big encounter is with a group of hobgoblins or goblins, and you have to sort of ransack their cave and stuff like that. It sort of sets the tone that there is this other compared to your party. So that you're the good guys, you're getting rid of a pest. And I think it's interesting because, again, it says, like, you don't necessarily have to play these characters as villains of the piece. They are well-rounded, and you only ever see the one side of it. And I actually thought that was quite interesting reading through this, is that when you're picking one of these races, to think about the cultures, because it talks about that in the player's handbook. When you pick a dwarven character or as a dwarven race for your character, there's a little box that sort of says like how dwarves view other races, as it gives that idea about how they interact with each other. And I thought that was quite cool because you're like, so dwarves think elves are a little bit snooty, or humans, they're nice, but they don't live long enough and can't trust those gnomes or something like that.
I really like those boxes. I think that was new this edition, and they are really fun.
And I think that's the thing. Now, if you're going to play these races, it's like, well, they're not going to be necessarily one-dimensional, or they're evil, etc. They're going to have cultural sort of connections to the other sort of races in that book, and then probably with the, and I'm going to say traditional in quotation marks, but from the player's handbook, races as well. And it doesn't really it doesn't say that in this, in Volo's about like, what their connection is to. In fact, it leaves it completely open to you as a DM and as a person. Because if you're going to have these characters in your world, it encourages you to make those connections yourself and make them as detailed or as vague as you want, and to get people fill them out. And I just thought that was actually quite a nice way to sort of world build in a way, something you can do yourself and make those connections and make your version of hobgoblins or bugbears or orcs different to how people traditionally see them. And I just thought that was just a really cool idea.
Yeah, that's a really, really cool idea. You get a lot of that when you read books like Eberron. I did notice that when they take all the races and there's a totally different slant on how each race works in that particular campaign. And this is a really good example of that. But you're right. The best place to start is the monstrous race's place in the world that you are going to play in. And it can range in all kinds of manners, between you're playing a one-shot where you have a particular little quest that you're doing in a little village, and none of you will ever play this again. It'll have no bearing on anything you ever do again. It's totally one-shot, totally open, and actually nobody minds if you want to play a hobgoblin or whatever. It has no consequence whatsoever. But it may also go the full circle to actually, these people are traditionally seen as the villains of the piece or evil, and it has an appropriate place in the world where if you walk in as a kobold to a town, you will be arrested or killed on sight, and you have to think about that in the way. So I think that is a conversation you've got to have between the DM and the players who want to play these things, because some DMs have a very black and white image of how you want to present these things. Other people are much happier to sort of give it to what I call the sort of player justification approach, where you go, okay, that's fine, but how? Explain this to me, like pitch it to me, and we'll find a place to make this work effectively. Because there's a whole sliding scale, and ultimately this is up to you as to how much you want to make these rules change your campaign. If you want somebody playing as an orc, and actually sometimes the player themselves wants this, if they want their orc to genuinely have rocks thrown at them every time they go near civilization, that's fine. But if other people just really associate with an orc because that's their spirit Lord of the Rings character or something, or whatever it may be, and actually they just want to play a sort of, as you say, so you're defining this person as how you want to, with a very sort of translucent image or a very hollow sense of typical D&D sense, so you can just play this character as you want, that's also fine.
And you've actually touched on a very slight thing there, so I wanted to talk about, which was like how would you fit them into the world that you are creating? You know, would you change it like that? But then also, so you go from the world down to the actual party itself. Are you the only monstrous adventurer in your party? If so, how does that affect or impact inter-party relations? Or is it a good mix of monstrous and traditional characters? Or is it completely monstrous? I love the idea of everyone being a completely monstrous adventurer and having that dynamic as well. Because again, it feels like to me, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like there is definitely, with sort of the hobgoblins or goblinoid races, a definite hierarchy. But I would love to see like a kobold leader trying to get these people together, and then their ability to sort of cower and whatever, but it actually works really well, and again, other opportunities for role play. But you do, like you said, need that conversation with not only the DM, but with the other party members as well. So is there a reason why you have at least one monstrous adventurer? Is there a connection? Were they saved by another person? Do they have a particular bond? And actually focusing on the bonds between the characters, which it goes into, I quite like that. I don't think I've ever read that in a D&D book before, because obviously it always says, like, if you're thinking about this character, maybe think of these points, but actually it says at the beginning that this is such a different area, maybe not as traditional perhaps, but maybe have a proper think about, like, what are you doing? There's a big focus on the story aspect before you get into mechanics, which I just thought was so different, and I really appreciated it, I guess, as a story RPG myself.
Yeah, and it gives a really good opportunity for players to work with each other to have a joint narrative, because a lot of the ways that you can get a monstrous character into your campaign, as you say, are relating to were you rescued, were you blackmailed, were you brought up from a young age, and all of these things can be used to tie a very unsuspectingly normal looking PC like a human fighter to a bugbear sorcerer that maybe the family of these humans once were killing infestation of bugbears, and they saw the young infant with magical powers and took pity, and it stowed away maybe, or it was taken away, and maybe it doesn't realize what happened. But yeah, there's all kinds of sort of ways of justifying it. But I like the idea that you get players involved with each other. Like, often if you're playing a campaign, you really want people to become invested in the campaign and in the story. You can talk about your world as much as you want, and you can get somebody involved as much as you want. But if people are actually entwined in terms of their narratives, I don't know, people take it more seriously sometimes because they want to do good by the other person. And when the story is really interesting because it involves something very unusual, I don't know, maybe it would be, you're more vested than you would normally be.
Oh yeah, 100%, definitely. Let's sort of move on slightly then to the actual mechanics of each sort of individual race. So start at the alphabetical beginning, I guess. So bugbears. What is it about bugbears that make them sort of stand out as an adventurer?
So bugbears are traditionally, and I would sort of loosely put this, as more powerful than the average sort of character. When I first started D&D. It was 3.5 edition, and it just isn't that old really. But they had this idea that you could play monstrous characters all the way through the monster manual. But unlike in 5th edition, where generally speaking every race has a +2, some feats or spells, a couple of skills or languages or whatever it is, and they all kind of roughly similar in terms of scaling, or in the same sort of ballpark anyway. 3.5 edition genuinely just threw the book out the window. You are as powerful as the monster you played. And if you played a vampire, then you were going to be way more powerful than if you played a kobold. I think like a kobold in that edition had huge penalties to like lots of stats.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they kind of did away with that. But this actually brings in a sort of little idea that your character may not be as balanced as other characters, and it's kind of deliberate. Like Bugbears are a really good example of this. You get strength by 2, dex by 1. So far, so normal. They push the age into 16 to 80, very human-like. The alignment, it says chaotic evil, which again, that is for you to use. If you don't want to be chaotic evil, you want to be lawful good, then you have to kind of think about why your Bugbear is different to the usual and all that sort of thing. They're pretty big, 6 to 8 feet tall and weigh up to 350 pounds. Base speed of 30 feet, dark vision. This is all very normal. Powerful build even, very normal. And then it gets a little bit silly because suddenly you are long-limbed, which means all of your weapon melee attacks on your turn are 5 feet greater in range than normal. So you can hit people with long swords at 10 feet or spears at 15 feet or whatever it may be, which incidentally has some hilarious builds with things like the pole master, the pole weapon master, sentinel feats and all this sort of thing. You get proficiency in the stealth skill, and then on top of that, if you surprise a creature and hit it with an attack in the first turn, you also get an extra 2d6 damage. So there are some builds here that are absolutely mad, and Bugbears are specifically not as balanced, say, as, I mean, I say that variant humans are about as unbalanced as you get. Starting with the feet means you can get just a ridiculous character from level 1, as we know from Great Weapon Master.
I don't know what you're talking about. I generally don't, because I forget it all the time. So
Indeed. I was in session 0 where it was like, there is a bear. Okay, I Great Weapon Master and hit, and it's dead. You're like, okay, good.
I solved the problem. It's fine.
But to make up for that, Bugbears obviously have a role-playing place in the game. Traditionally, they are quite evil. They are selfish. They sort of fight for themselves and fight to survive. So fitting them into a campaign, yes, you may have a character that has these abilities, but then there's all these penalties that come with it from a social and an RP sort of point of view.
So this actually relates back to something before where we talked about there is something called the origins table, which we sort of have briefly sort of mentioned in passing about like what is the origin of your monstrous adventurer, and usually you have that with other races as well, like, you know, giving yourself like a purpose, I guess. And one of the things on the monstrous origin table, it talks about you were possibly cursed or polymorph, and I recognize this instantly when we come into Goblins, because in the new Critical Role season, if people have watched it, I presume anyone who's into D&D streaming will have at least heard of Critical Role, but there is someone that does play a goblin character on it who, spoilers, I guess, if you've not caught up, but is cursed to be a goblin in some respect. And that's quite a big chunk of their story arc. And I'd never seen that before as a way to introduce that your character has changed or changes character halfway through. So let's talk about goblins in general. So what is it about goblins that make them great? Or not?
Well, no, the fact that they're not great, that's the thing. It's their size and the dexterity and the ability to absolutely go mental about anyone bigger than them. So, yeah, goblins are traditionally very evil pack creatures that kill and eat and pillage and generally are up to no good. Typically, they get captured, if not captivated, by hobgoblins and other sort of bigger races. So there's a superiority complex there you've got to think about. Generally speaking, apart from the dex and con score, they're pretty normal, apart from the fact that they are a small race, like halflings or gnomes or anything like that. They get dark vision, which is pretty normal. They have nimble escape, which is an interesting one. It essentially gives them rogue-like powers as a race. So you can take disengage or hide actions as a bonus action on each of your turns. So not a dash, but you can do disengage or hide. So you could play as a much heavier class or a sort of magical class, for instance, and have these skills that normally you've got to take a 2-level dip in rogue to get, which is, again, quite interesting. And then you have Fury of the Small, which I think is probably the one thing that stands out in my head as being the most critical role-like skills on these things, because just hearing him shout Fury of the Small whenever he hits someone. But it's not even a roll thing. It's just once per short rest, if the creature that is larger than you is hit by an attack or spell of yours, you deal extra damage equal to your level. Doesn't start off as very good, but once you hit level 15 or 16, it's a nice little bit of damage where you can chuck like a level 1 spell or just one attack at somebody. And yeah, I mean, so he plays a rogue, and watching the sneak attacks hit with Fury of the Small added in, you can just get some ridiculous attacks. They are very good fun.
It just all adds up, really, when you look at it. All right, well, let's move on to Hobgoblins then. What is it about Hobgoblins that make them great or not so great monstrous adventurers?
Well, Hobgoblins are military-trained, precision, intelligent creatures that live in forts and form war bands, and generally speaking are evil, superior to everything else. They're quite good. They're tough. Annoyingly, in my head, and I guess it's because that ability was it's thrown down to another creature on this table, but Hobgoblins have a sort of pack tactics-esque ability in the monster manual where if they surround somebody or they have sort of sneak attack, effectively, they can pile on the damage and do lots of extra damage. So they work really well in groups. And they've kind of tried to reflavor it a little bit so that it's not just using that sort of ability, it's giving you something else. You get a con bonus, you get a little bit of intelligence bonus. That's an unusual one, having constitution and intelligence. You can actually make a beefy wizard or something along those lines, which is quite interesting. Usual dark vision, bit of martial training, so light armor, again with a spellcaster. Weirdly enough, these creatures are better spellcasters than they are military. This is why I find so weird about the Hobgoblin traits. They haven't really given any decent abilities to actual martial ability. There's no strength or dex here. There's no extra damage, really. But you have one thing called Saving Face, which is, I think, quite interesting. Because it depends on how many people you're playing with. If you're playing in a big party, it's really, really good. Once per short rest, if you miss an attack roll or ability check or saving throw, you can give yourself a bonus up to +5 based on how many people that are allies are around you so that you can essentially not fail in front of them. And that guaranteed hit is really, really good. That's if you've got like a very rare or difficult to use attack, or you're throwing a level 8 spell at somebody, or you've got one bolt of dragon slaying and you really need to hit the target. Very, very useful ability. But otherwise, yeah, weirdly enough, sort of, I think, more specialized towards being a spellcaster than anything else.
That's interesting. I actually hadn't considered that, but actually looking it through, like you said, that constitution increase and the intelligence one, but the saving face one does sound more like a military thing. Like if you lose like an action roll of some sort. Yeah, I hadn't actually considered that per se. But I do love that idea that the saving face one is that it looks like it missed and you're like, no, it doesn't. And everyone's like, oh, hooray! I just like that idea that you will it to succeed. A bit like, like Paladin, sort of the aura, but just for yourself. You're like, I am that good. I just thought that was a really cool.
It's just the ultimate, like, bullshittery. Like, no, I'm confident, I'm going to do this.
That's so cool. Oh, I like that as well. Yeah, you're just that arrogant as a person. You're like, no, it's going to work. I believe in it. And then having that, like, just that extra dip into like, +5 to come out whenever you need for, like you said, only for a short or long rest. But actually, if it resets on a short rest, you could be like, I'm done, but we cannot go any further. I need a little lie down. so you never always have it for each combat.
No, you all need lie downs as I watch with my eyes closed.
So let's get on to Kobolds. I will say, I'll put this out there, I think Kobolds are brilliant. Like, I think Goblins were always the sort of traditional, sort of like the baddies, sort of like you face them early on in your campaigns. Kobolds, I only discovered not even fairly recently. I did it when I was sort of playing some of the earlier modules, and I just think they're brilliant. There was an episode of High Rollers where Mark Humes had like a whole society with Kobolds, and they just all had great voices, a great sort of society, and it was like Knick Knack was one of the leaders and all that sort of thing.
Oh God, I
was just, I am a great warrior, Knick Knack. And you're like, yes, I will follow this person through and through. So let's talk about Kobolds in general. What makes them great or not so great adventurers?
Just before that, the one I'm thinking of is, again, I don't want to keep saying about Critical Role, but Splat.
Oh, yes.
That or
It's the Chris Perkins, very, very
Perkins.
minor cameo.
Very short cameo.
Very short.
Yes, kobolds are actually a sort of give and take class. There are some genuine penalties here. And I think probably the first negative stat score I have seen in D&D up till this point. So dexterity increases by 2, but strength goes down by 2. They are naturally very weak. They also have sunlight sensitivity, which is a real pain if you're doing anything outside. And I think there are only a few classes or a few races that have this. I think Drow, yeah, and maybe a couple of others that I can't think of. But if you actually, as a DM, enforce sunlight sensitivity, it would be a genuine handicap because disadvantage is a real git on, I think it's on, like, mathematically, it works out to be about -5 on average on the roll if you've got disadvantage. So yeah, really, really, really harsh. But to make up for that, boy, have they got some fun things. So it's sort of the minor ability, apart from, you know, being small and having 30 feet of movement and dark vision and all the usual stuff. They can speak Draconic, which is quite cool. Just a random one. But they have this thing called grovel, cower, and beg. Oh God, that's a tongue twister. Grovel, cower, and beg. Which basically means as an action, they can give advantage to all attacks to any enemies within 10 feet of you as you spend your turn just making a scene. Like, absolutely just be pathetic and distracting, and everybody else gets advantage, which that is really good. Really, really good. And you can use it every short rest. And to make it even better, they have pack tactics straight from the monster manual, which is you have advantage on any attack roll if at least one of your allies is within 5 feet of the creature. Instant advantage. That is mental. Imagine if you had a barbarian or a fighter or a rogue. You don't need to do anything to get advantage. It's crazy.
Again, I just love that idea that I go, okay, I'm going to go in, and they go in and then just make the scene, as you said. But like, in my head, just reading it, I see like weirdly like a Cobalt bard just be like, I am a performer, and like do the performing, but like a dramatic scene or anything like that. So people look and go, oh my God, what is this creature? And then everyone attacks, and then being able to like A2 brute and just stab back on all the other. I just love that idea that this class certainly to me appeals to me in the sense of like you might need to role play a little bit more and think more like in the sense of like if you're not going to be like hacking and slashing and like doing the same things, like, well, this you could, it's a bit like Bardic Inspiration where you can, like as we do in Xerios, Sam or Gogos now, I don't know, are we changing the name? We never discussed. Where Sam used to flavor like his inspirations to be stuff, and I think you could do the same for this particular thing as well. You could recite a short speech or just like, I don't know, make up something on the spot and do that performance as well. If people wanted to do that, I certainly think I would do that. I don't know how long it would last if it was a whole campaign. I think I would dwindle quite quickly.
That's the thing. You've got to decide with any of these monstrous characters how much you're going to dig, really sort of blow the RP up. You can go all guns blazing and go for the big character comedy piece, or you can go for something much more subtle and much more edgy and quiet. There's always options for you. I mean, imagine playing a kobold who was almost silent and really straight-laced and properly like detective, like, hey, that's okay. You do that. That's lovely. And then gets into combat and goes, and just makes horrible noises.
That would be amazing.
Then the anime eyes open, as you say, and it goes, no, it's my turn. So all the kneecaps have been taken off in one go. Yeah, no, kobolds are ridiculous. And absolutely one of the most min-maxable classes or races in the game. Like they are, you can make some crazy builds with them.
Yeah, I see. Now that you said that straight-lace idea, I just now have the idea of a mafia boss in my head, like almost like the Godfather bit is a Cobalt, and so it's that seriousness, and then there's that performance outside, and then comes back in, and it's just like a cold-blooded killer. So yeah, you can have so much.
You could
fun
have
with
a
that.
Pinky and the Brain style brain character, but as a Kobold.
Yes. Oh my
Silence, fool.
That would be amazing. Oh my God, what they better appear in Gogos, and I'm just saying. Orcs. Let's talk about orcs. What makes them a great monstrous adventurer or not so great?
Well, orcs, you naturally have to compare to half orcs, which are already in the book and have been in the book since the Player's Handbook came back right at the start. Orcs get +2 strength and +1 con, so really good frontline soldiers. But apart from that, weirdly enough, half-orcs actually are slightly tougher, I think. If you think about what half-orcs get, you get an extra damage dice on critical hits with the savage attack, and you get the ability to not die if you get brought down to 0 health.
That's true.
You know, once per, I think, is it once per short rest? I can't remember. But orcs don't have any of that. Instead, they have dark vision, which I think half-orcs get as well. And they have aggressive, which means that as a bonus action, you can charge towards somebody as long as you're going towards somebody that you're charging at. So effectively adds another 30 feet worth of movement or more. I was thinking if you took like a monk class, for instance, or a barbarian with more sort of movement speed than normal, you could close the distance very, very quickly, which is useful. You can use it as much as you want. So orcs move really, really quick. They also get intimidation as a skill. You get powerful builds. You can lift things, which I guess some people play with encumbrance rules. I guess that is a thing. But yeah, orcs are a funny one. I think I do like the aggressive, and I think you could probably roleplay that really well. Just a frontline person who's willing to just charge in. But half orcs, they have more of a traditional sort of barbarian skills, the sort of the ability to add the critical hit damage in. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
I don't know about you, Ryan, but when I look at sort of characters and stuff like that, obviously, taking my example of my character, obviously I hit hard and everything like that, but the ability to move around the map quickly, whether it's through various means like flying, stuff like that, but actually being able to use your movement and then your action to dash, something like that, but actually being able to use your bonus action to move up to half your movement, you could get so much ground. And actually, I feel like just being able to position yourself around the map. So if you were having, say, if you're one of those people who's more tactically minded than I am, but like being able to place yourself so you are within 5 feet and then your ally gets advantage because they're a kobold, etc. And I feel like movement is not maybe seen as important. Most of the times it is like, how hard can I hit and how hard is it to hit me, rather than how quickly can I move out of the way. Because I think there's all that sort of thing about being able to withstand certain hits. But if you need to get out of somewhere very quickly because the terrain is falling or anything like that, obviously in this example it goes towards an enemy of your choice, but it means you can zip around the battle map essentially very quickly. And I just thought that's actually quite cool. Actually, it's a nice tactical thing you could do.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you're a monk, I think it really would be crazy if you had those levels.
The final one, which I guess we're both going to pronounce differently in different ways. I think it's Yuan-Ti or Yuan-Ti, the pure blood.
Yuan-Ti.
Yuan-Ti?
Definitely what I...
Well...
I have no idea.
We've no idea.
You made me doubt myself now. Yuan-Ti.
Yuan-Ti, I think. I don't know. This race, what makes them a good monstrous adventurer or not so good a monstrous adventurer?
Let me put it these ways. These guys are possibly the most powerful in this book.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why? Well, what jumps out in that sort of stat sheet for you?
Instantly, I see sort of magic resistance, so saving throws on everything, essentially.
Yeah. Advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. And other magical effects is always the one that gets missed out whenever people think about using like counter spell, for instance. It's just like, oh, you can counter spells, but not magical effects. It's brilliant. Having these characters means that pretty much you have an arcane dampener on you at all times, and including monsters that come along with these magical effects as well. You're resistant to them and you have advantage on all saving throws. Again, you combine that with a monk, for instance, or a paladin, or someone with a bit more of saving throw boost, and you've got somebody who would never ever fail any throw. Also, just immune to poison and the poison condition. You'd be surprised how often that comes up in some campaigns with beasts and things with fangs. The rest of it's pretty standard. +2 for charisma, +1 for intelligence. So again, quite a spellcasty class. Nice to see somebody that can do well at things like sorcerers and bards and stuff like that. But a bard, Yuan-Ti, the idea of that is really funny because Yuan-Ti are supposed to be absolutely emotionless and without any feeling whatsoever. So having a bard would be, I am singing a song, regimented song 52. You are happy.
No, I think that'd be the best way. You think about how many sort of stuck-up indie bands there are about their music, like, hi, we're this person, we're going to play our album now. And then they play it, and it's like garbage. You're like, thank you for listening, bye. That's how I see it, like that. Here's Wonderwall again.
With an added superiority complex where you can go, here is my stuff. It is the best. You will listen to it. You will hear nothing better. I genuinely have heard everything today was better, but okay, cool, great.
Okay,
that's fine.
Great. And the sort of the sort of innate spell casting that you already get. You get poison spray, which makes sense, and then animal friendship, but then in brackets, but only with snakes. It's just like, how often is that going to happen?
That's a very specific thing, yeah. I guess if you, there must be a way you can get some spells in where you summon snakes and maybe you don't have control over them, but now you do or something, or there must be something. I haven't quite figured that one out yet, but yeah.
I feel like the vision of Yuan-Ti or Yuan-Ti or whatever, they are forever going to be tainted by like the Harry Potter and like Salazar Slytherin, I can never say his name right, clearly, Parseltongue, all that sort of thing. So that's what I see all the time, is some sort of Slytherin aspect to them. And whilst I am a fully claimed Slytherin myself, as a result, I'm like, oh no, not another Slytherin in real life. I think I'd be annoyed if I saw one in the game. So.
I know. These guys are hilariously evil. So how on earth you would get one of these into your campaign? That's the challenge. That's the absolute, if you can come up with a great way, perfect.
Yeah. So what was it that sort of stood out for you with all these races? Is there one particular race you're like, this is the sort of thing I want to see more of in campaigns, or one you'd like to play yourself?
I like the idea that people really have to think about their backstories. And I always like people who play quite subtle characters. Like if you've got a trait, you've got a funny thing you want to do, or if you've got like backstory you want to bring in, sometimes the best way to do these things is with subtlety so that you don't go over the top, and it has more effect when you do whatever you were going to do. And I genuinely think that monstrous characters adds another layer to that, because you're sort of thinking, okay, if I've got some sort of curse and I'm a horrifyingly disgusting kobold that is now with the party that remember my original elven form, whatever it may be, you have to think, well, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm not over the top. How would I act in a way that's like quite normal, but then maybe my new form gets the better of me at times, or maybe I have my moments. I don't know, it's quite interesting. But as a DM as well, you can throw any of these into NPCs as well and use these stats to make NPCs as well as players can use them. And that can be quite fun, because you could make villains with a little bit more interest. You could make allies of the party, or maybe anti-heroes the party come across that have all of these traits. I mean, what if the wizard that lives at the top of the mountain in isolation does so because they are a hobgoblin and they have an inherent evil in them that gives them a superiority complex, and they've taken themselves away from the world so that they just can get a bit of peace. Or I don't know, there's all kinds of things you can do, but I just quite like the idea. It's just throw something different into the game. It's a bit like, how the monster manual doesn't really have many good creatures that are interesting. A lot of the really interesting ones are evil.
Yes.
It's the same thing that players can often have not very many interesting evil choices. They're all good. And it's a similar thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. I think going back to it, the only one I can't see myself ever sort of playing is kind of what I said before, the Yuan-Ti sort of purebloods. I guess for me, I'm not sure how you'd implement them to campaigns. Again, from what I remember briefly looking at Team of Annihilation and sort of their whole sort of thing, it's always been evil. And I know like with the upcoming sort of like Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and stuff like that, you can change things around and you don't have to play them as evil completely. But I feel that a bit like the GIF, there is so much backstory to them. There is so much entrenched in them. It's like, how can you implement them in such a way that doesn't necessarily mean a lot of effort for you and your DM to rewrite the whole history of it? Because I feel they just I don't want to say comes with baggage, because that's not what I mean, but like with the GIF, for example, obviously you had 2 big wars, one that's still going on, and does that mean mind flayers are also involved? Oh, well, we put them in here as well. Yuan-Ti to me sounds like there's a, from what I remember, I know this is how bad I've done this research, there's an evil god of some sort and they're trying to bring them back, and it's something to do with snakes, and it's, like you said, there's always different types of Yuan-Ti as well.
I think it's cannibalism from memory. I haven't read about it, but it's humans that go so horribly cannibalistic that they curse themselves. I think. Yeah. Maybe. I can't remember.
Well, write in if you know. Because we clearly don't.
It's in the book.
It's in the book. We just
clearly haven't read it.
No. Maybe for a future one we can sort of depress ourselves by looking at Yuan-Ti and cannibalism.
Yeah.
I've already said what my sort of thing is for like things I wasn't so keen on. So I'm not so keen on like Yuan-Ti per se, but is there anything that you weren't particularly keen on in this sort of chapter?
Well, as I said, I do think they missed a trick with hobgoblins, because hobgoblins are really powerful and very clever military machines in the monster manual. And I don't necessarily know that that has been reflected in how they've come across. Maybe I would have liked to have seen maybe a D6 added to damage when they're within 5 feet of an ally or something. Or, I mean, again, that's quite powerful, but something that relates to that a little bit. Saving face is a really interesting ability, but I don't know. It just seems a little bit, yeah, especially if you've got a party of maybe 2 people. I mean, again, I like the idea of a number of allies affecting the roll, but it's a little bit random. And yeah, if you don't have as many friends, maybe that's not so easy to do. I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on how many allies you recruit. So you'd be like, all right, I'm going out on this mission. Is there anyone from the town that wants to come with me? Can I encourage them to be my friends?
Specifically, anybody that wants to stay within 30 feet of me at all times.
Yes.
And that I can see at all times.
Yes.
Is that okay?
That's true, isn't it? Because obviously if they go invisible, then you can't see them. So that,
no saving face if you don't know they're there.
Well, what if it's for yourself, Ryan? What if you're like, I'm watching? So how would you implement, in general, have you got any ideas how would you put in Monstrous Adventurers into campaigns? Say if we decided, sod it, all of our characters now in Gargos, we're just going to change to be monstrous characters. What would you do to sort of like transition the process, I guess, if anything?
Personally, if somebody came to me with an idea as I want to play this sort of character, I'd have a think about where that character was in terms of the world, if there's going to be some RP issues and serious ones at that, if this sort of race is not loved and is genuinely frowned upon. You then have a conversation with the player, and I genuinely think that I would approach it from the idea that, okay, pitch it to me. This is the world. This is the default reaction. So how have you got into the situation where you are who you are? Explain it to me. Give me some backstory. And you'd really make somebody have to genuinely think about their backstory a lot more, because you can't have like a sort of grey office worker style PC background. Like you can sometimes with humans. You can just pick the militia background and say, I served in the army and I saw something I didn't want to. You know, with a monstrous character, you do have to genuinely think about it a lot and come up with something a little bit more specific that flows into the campaign. So you've got to have a good conversation. You've got to make sure you've got something down that you've all thought about and that you're all happy to go with. And yeah, it's an excuse to have a sort of two-way conversation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, thinking of it more as sort of one-shots, I thought like, what would I like to see? And I think for me, I'd love to see more fully monstrous adventure groups. So you have, you know, like you said, like you have all the sort of classes covered, but they're all sort of different monsters races. So like I would definitely think a Kobold leader would be great of some description. But then I was thinking like, well, what would they be doing? I didn't want to be like, oh, they're going to do something evil, because that happens all the time when you think, okay, you've got all these monstrous races, they're clearly out for evil or out to get adventurers. You could totally do that. But I thought, what would be better? It'd be like something like they're part of a mafia group, so they're out for their own evil gains, and it doesn't matter who they rob or swindle. But then I watched the film Severance recently. I don't know if you've ever seen that film.
Severance? No, I don't think I have.
So it's so stupid. It's so basically it's like they're office workers essentially, and they go on a bonding trip to Germany to a cabin to bond, and obviously things go wrong. There's a killer on the loose for it. What I want to see, monsters go on a bonding trip because their clan has told them so, and that they have to go and like do like an away day or some sort, and they have to work together. But then they could accidentally stumble into like a human settlement, or they come across something evil underneath, that they all have to work together as a team. And so do 2 parts essentially, do the horrible corporate stuff, whatever team bonding stuff, but then also save the day. But yeah, I think for me, I would definitely, if people were considering doing a monstrous character, I'd be like, well, let's open it up to everyone. What do people want to do? And so that everyone can have a look. And because I think that's the thing, is that sometimes people don't realize that there's a whole, I mean, D&D is full of different races and stuff. And I feel a lot of the time people do just stick to the player's handbook. I know I do, because I just think it's easier for everyone involved if I just go, I found this. And it's like, I don't want to bring that onto a new DM, certainly if they're creating a brand new world and all that sort of thing. But I think there's just something different about Monstrous Adventurers, about seeing it from their point of view. And like you said, like the anti-heroes, the difference. It's a bit like there's the Amazon Prime series called The Boys, which is superheroes, but they're the shit ones because they've got the really good superheroes that just destroy everything, and then they've had to put a team of anti-superheroes together who do have superhero powers and go and clean up after them and stuff. And that's what I'd like to see. It's a more anti-hero. These are the people who actually get on with stuff, but actually they don't get the same praise as adventuring parties as we would traditionally see them.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, that would be a really good way of doing it. Having background workers, the people who sort of come in and mop up afterwards or have to do the things that no one else wants to do.
And also, I think, just because I just thought of it, I know there's one way of this be like, hey, we're going to do a one-shot, you're all going to play bards. I now want to see Kobold bards, like a rock band of some sort.
Do you? Is that
Yes.
something you really want to see? Because
Yes.
we'll see it.
As a one-shot.
A one-shot. Now I'm going to throw this at you as a NPC that follows you around for the entirety of your campaign, singing at you.
Traveling minstrels, perfect. Do it, Ryan. I will hire them. I'll spend the rest of my money.
I'll see how annoying I can be.
So before we sort of wrap up, is there any sort of recommendations you have for similar things about Monstrous Adventurers or anything like that? Anything that sort of springs to mind?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because most fantasy and books I can think of genuinely follow somebody who is destined for good or is an outcast that is of the normal human race. I'm genuinely trying to think of something that would apply here. I mean, the only examples I can really think of that worked for me are other campaigns of D&D I've seen with people, but I don't want to give too much away just in case it spoils anything.
That's fair.
Difficult one. You having to get you to bail me out on this one.
I will, because you have played in something which has had goblins in. We played Goblin Quest by Grant Howitt, where you play you basically play a group of goblins that, in the sense of like they are, you bond together, you have a certain goal to do, but you do die by really different extreme deaths, and that's a really interesting one. There's also Kobold Encounter, which he recently wrote, where essentially you have the King Kobold who demands crazy things, and you as kobolds have to go off and collect them in some hilarious hijinks in typical Grant Howitt style. Yeah. The other one I did think of, like an online stream, which again I don't know if you ever saw actually, but Critical Role way back in the early days, they did a Pathfinder one shot which was just called Goblins to the Poop, I think it was called, and it had always I know. It had Ashley Birch, who plays Tiny Tina, Ivan Van Norman, and Phil Lamar, other famous voice actors. And they just all played with, I think, Marisha and Taliesin, just played all the different sort of goblin classes you could do. And then they had a similar thing where they all had to infiltrate a town, and they all dressed up as like one person, and they were going through, and it just... I think they blew up the town in the end. It was absolutely ridiculous. But again, it was that idea that they had all these classes and putting them together, but they weren't necessarily... The only thing that held them back was their own sort of intelligence as players, in a way, because they were like, okay, now what? The two final things... Again, so thinking back to sort of like being polymorphed or cursed into a different shape, where else will you see that in a film but Shrek? Where you have Princess Fiona, and my namesake, obviously. It turns out, I don't know if you ever do this, like type in your name into the GIF search, and then the first GIF is what you look like. And I'm like, I know who it's going to be. I have no problem with it, but also there's been no famous Fionas in films for ages, so it's always going to be Princess Fiona.
There's plenty of Ryans. I'm just trying to work out which one it would be.
Well, it'd be Ryan Reynolds, surely.
I was thinking Gosling.
Oh, well, oh, my bad. I have to pick between those two.
Exactly. There's quite a few.
And the final one I was thinking of was, and I actually haven't seen this film. I watched the trailer, and maybe if it's out on Netflix or something, I'll watch it. But I think about 2 or 3 years ago, there was the Warcraft film where you had orcs and humans, obviously based on Warcraft, coming together to fight against a common enemy or cause. And obviously they had those sort of cultural tensions about like, oh, well, we don't trust them. We've been fine all this time, blah, 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 blah. And actually one thing we haven't mentioned in the sort of book, it talks about like, why is your particular character not with your society or your clan? Is it because you are an ambassador? So maybe playing an ambassador for your people going to visit the capital or these other clans, or are you an outcast? Have you done something so terrible that you are no longer with your thing? And I think from what I saw, Warcraft has some similar themes where they're speaking ambassadors or they've been cast out from their clans as well. So yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that sounds amazing.
as you can tell, right, I was like, what else has Monstrous Adventurers in? I had a good old Google search.
No, that's really good. You bailed me out of that. I just can't believe I didn't think of Shrek. Oh.
Hey, not like I think about it every time I do a GIF, so...
Yeah, that's fair.
Oh, well, this is brilliant, Ryan. Thank you so much. Shall I tell you what my topic is for the next time we record?
That would be great. I'm genuinely interested. What do you got up your sleeves?
My arms? No, that was terrible. Okay. Okay, right. Tough crowd. So I think next time, again, going a little bit into world building, but something different for the actual sort of adventurer people out there. We've looked at monstrous adventurers and sort of like the different races of what about if your adventurer is someone that needs specialist equipment to get around? What is it, something that, you know, maybe other adventurers don't have, and you want to be able to sort of show that in the fantasy world. So next time we're going to look at a very exciting topic, the combat wheelchair, which is like a community created item by one Sarah Thompson, or Mustang Art on Twitter. And they've sort of put together this sort of very detailed document on creating basically the combat wheelchair, how to sort of implement a sort of fantasy version of a wheelchair into your D&D campaigns. And it's really exciting, really, really good.
That's really cool. Genuinely interested. Like community made.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the first time actually we'll be looking at something that is not officially Dungeons and Dragons. So
how dare you? I feel repulsed already.
What?
Oh,
no.
Honestly.
I will change your mind. You'll love it. You'll love it.
Like what's it? No, it should be really good.
So, before we sign off, Ryan, is there anything you want to plug? Is there anything we should know about? What are you up to? What's happening with you?
My phone is really low on power, so I should plug that in. That is a really good point. Thank you for reminding me. Come find me on Discord as well if you like this sort of humour. Hey, that's really good. Ursa Ryan, or the Ursa Ryan Discord, which definitely doesn't have an acronym that you need to know about. That's totally fine.
I'm surprised it took you this long to include mentioning the acronym. I've got to be honest.
I like to leave people hanging, you know? I only want people that are 12 to 15 episodes in. I've totally lost track of where we are.
No, we're somewhere in that realm, I think. We've definitely done 13, I think. But for me, my name is Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. Going super well.
Always super well.
I don't know what I'm doing.
I'm just looking forward to it. Actually, I'm not looking forward to it, but I'm scared of the day when you just say it's going terribly. Oh God, what do I say now?
You just go, I know. I think with all creative things. Also, a quick shout out to my mum, who has listened to every single episode of the DM's Book Club and has given very good feedback about how good you are, Ryan, on this call.
Are you sure you've been listening to the same thing? That doesn't sound like... That's very sweet, thank you.
But also, apparently, we do go sometimes too deep into topics, so we need to think about that a bit in the future.
This episode would have been terrible.
I know. I thought I'd mention it at the end.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Well, until next time, friends, we will, what do we normally say?
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.